Ella suddenly exclaimed loudly, pulling my attention to some commotion on the dance floor. I couldn't understand her excitement. Her constant chatter was beginning to grate on my nerves. Around us, people were discussing their New Year's resolutions, and I began considering the idea of distancing myself from Ella as a potential goal for the upcoming year. It had become a tradition for me to spend New Year's Eve mourning my past mistakes, particularly the ones I had caused myself. Obsession had ravaged my life, much like a gambler who recklessly loses everything. So there we were, Ella and I, caught in our own melancholy, while others celebrated the passing year. This party had been her idea. While everyone else laughed, danced, and enjoyed themselves, we sat on the sidelines, and no one seemed interested in joining us. Instead, people whispered and pointed, assuming we wouldn't notice their judgmental glances. This was our small Michigan town's big New Year's Eve party, and there had been a time when I would have loved it. I would have been out there wearing a silly hat and clinging to Gary, my husband, as if he were my lifeline. Those nights used to end with us in each other's arms, and both of our kids, Marianne and Benny, were conceived after New Year's Eve parties. Marianne was conceived right in our living room, unable to make it upstairs before Gary tore off my dress. Benny came 2 years later, outside the party hall, when Gary pushed me against a wall in the cold, taking me with such intensity that I still long for those days. The memory made me sigh, catching Ella's attention. She started to say something about someone I hated, but my anger quickly silenced her. I shifted my gaze across the room and spotted someone, but it wasn't her. I focused, and my mind drifted back to the first time I saw Gary at his company's Christmas party. He was 25, a shy new engineer awkwardly navigating the event. I was working as a server, not supposed to interact with guests, but I couldn't resist him. Despite the rule against fraternizing with customers, I couldn't resist Gary. By the end of the night, I slipped him a beer with a smile and a napkin with my name and number written on it. Clueless as ever, he didn't notice until later, loudly announcing his excitement, which drew the attention of everyone in the room. I played it cool, continuing my work, but even my supervisor smiled, amused by his pure enthusiasm. Within a week, we were dating. A month later, we were officially together, and within a year, we were married. Every moment with him felt perfect. I often told people that Gary was made for me. He was a devoted husband and a loving father, and I was sure we'd never be apart. Our life together was happy. We bought our dream house in a wonderful neighborhood, surrounded by great neighbors. It was a perfect place for our kids to grow up, and as time went on, my love for Gary only deepened. Gary life surprises often seem to hit out of nowhere. Whether it's trouble, betrayal, pain, or even love. I believe I'm in love. The signs are all there. The dizzy feeling when I look into her eyes, the certainty that she's the most amazing person in the world, and the need to protect her from anyone who might come between us. Above all, I'm convinced she feels the same and would never hurt me. As I prepare to take a big step, I hesitate. A few friends understand the significance of this moment, but no one knows my exact plan. I question if this move will really improve things. People say it strengthens relationships and removes doubts, but I'm not uncertain about my feelings. I know what love is. Looking across the room at Carol and her friend Ella, bitterness rises. Carol taught me how to love, but reflecting on the details of our past feels unnecessary. We were married for 20 years until things changed 2 years ago, right before Christmas. Carol caught a nasty flu. Being the devoted husband I was, I stayed home to care for her. By then, our kids were out of the house, Marianne was married and living in an apartment, while Benny was away at college. Carol worked part-time at the hospital, likely caught the virus there. During her illness, she lost her appetite and mostly wanted me to sit by her side, holding her hand. One day, while running to the market for fresh fruits and vegetables, I bumped into Misty Clark. I hadn't seen her or her husband, Steve, in months. Misty, a small, bird-like woman, never really caught my eye before, but that morning I noticed how attractive she was. She looked incredibly fit for a woman nearing 40, with toned legs and a flat stomach. Her yoga pants highlighted her shapely calves. In contrast, Carol was a bigger woman, and men often ogled her. But in that moment, I found myself sneaking glances at Misty. Sheila Phillips, standing behind me, said that since Misty and Steve divorced, she barely spoke to anyone. I hadn't known they split up and wondered why, especially in a small town where secrets were rare. Divorce got me thinking about relationships and how it must feel for her. Our town, though close-knit, had its wild side. There was a group of swappers who casually hinted at joining their gatherings if you were interested. Even non-swappers attended their parties, as long as they avoided the bedrooms. It was couples only, and participation was consensual, sometimes including married individuals with their spouse's permission. Carol and I had been heavily recruited, hearing all the usual lines about how swapping could spice up a marriage or help reconnect love by separating act from emotion. But the frequent use of sometimes, and their explanations always left me feeling uneasy. It didn't appeal to me. I had laughed off all those suggestions and refused to take any of them seriously. Eventually, they figured out we weren't interested. Misty and Steve were another couple sitting this one out. I often joked with Carol that she could have ruined that club, honey, if they ever got to look at your shapes. All those guys would be fighting over you, I'd tell her. They'd have to break up the club. Gary, you're being ridiculous, she'd reply. No one wants this body but you. I was so caught up in my thoughts that I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. Naturally, I bumped into the very person I was thinking about. Sorry, Misty, I said, pulling our shopping carts apart. It's okay, Gary, she replied. I know what you're going through. I felt lost when I first found out too. It may not seem like it now, but it does get better. You just need to give yourself time to realize you didn't do anything wrong. Hang in there. If you need someone to talk to, who understands, call me. She walked away, leaving me standing there confused about what the hell she meant. Holy crap, said the curious Sheila. In nearly a year, I've never seen that woman talk to anyone. What did you say to her? I didn't say anything, I replied. She did all the talking. Sheila, do you have any idea why she and Steve split up? Not a clue, Sheila said. They kept everything under wraps. They even saw an out-of-town divorce lawyer. She got the house, but I guess that's usually how these things go. If you hear anything, let me know. Okay. The conversation with Misty stayed on my mind. It made no sense. She was so pretty and nice. I couldn't understand why any man would divorce her. When I got home, Carol was still asleep, so I sat beside her, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Misty and the strange conversation. Carol woke up, and we exchanged some light-hearted words. I fed her more soup, and as her color improved, I felt better too. But something about the encounter with Misty kept nagging at me. I mentioned running into Misty, and Carol immediately tensed. Her grip tightened on my hand, and I could tell she was pretending to try to sleep. I asked if she knew Misty and Steve had divorced, and her body grew even more rigid. It was clear Carol knew something, but I couldn't figure out what. My gut told me this might be one of those subtle feuds between women, possibly linked to Ella, whom I didn't like. Ella was a troublemaker, and I hated that Carol was friends with her. But I knew it wasn't my place to choose her friends. I expected Carol to tell me that Misty hated Ella, but instead, her face tightened, and she avoided saying much. When she finally spoke, she warned me to stay away from Misty, mentioning she'd heard bad things and thought she might have gone crazy. A few days later, with Carol feeling better from the flu, I returned to work. During lunch, I planned to grab a sandwich but ended up seeing a woman jog by with long, tanned legs and a tight figure. Turned out to be Misty. How are you holding up? She asked. Misty, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be holding up from, I said. Didn't you get a divorce too? She asked. Why would I? I asked, confused. Never mind, she said. I've already said too much. Sorry, Gary, you're a really nice man. You deserve better. And then she just ran away, leaving me there confused for the rest of the day. I couldn't focus, and when I got home, I found myself watching Carol more closely, trying to clear my head. I went to the garage to work on my 1967 Mustang Fastback Resto mod project. I was modernizing the car's design while keeping its classic feel. upgrading the engine, drivetrain, and completely overhauling the interior. At that moment, I was still taking the car apart. Normally, I might have invited a couple of friends over to hang out, but I really needed to think. Half an hour into my work, I heard the phone ring. It rang several times before Carol picked it up. I never even thought about answering. If anyone called the landline, it was usually for her. People who wanted to reach me called my cell. It was probably Ella. She called Carol at least 3 times a day. I picked up the extension and confirmed it was Ella. The two of them were in a heated discussion. The hell did he run into her? Ella asked. I have no idea, Carol replied. But according to the divorce agreement, she's not supposed to talk to anyone about it. What are you going to do? Ella pressed. I'm calling Steve and telling him to rein in his ex, Carol snapped. That stupid witch already got us kicked out of the club and ruined her own marriage. Now she wants to mess mine up too. So have you thought about my idea? Ella asked. Come on. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I honestly can't manage it, Carol said. And to be honest, I'm not sure I'd want to. You know you're considering it, Ella laughed. Talk to you later. As they both hung up, I was filled with more rage than I had ever experienced in my life. I threw a wrench across the garage. Luckily, the garage was made of cinder blocks. The wrench bounced back and knocked several car wash products off a nearby shelf. Gary, honey, are you all right? Carol called from somewhere in the house. Better than ever, I replied, and I meant it. Honey, I'm having trouble getting some of these parts loose, I yelled. I'm heading out to buy an easy out. I knew she had no idea what an easy out was really for, or that I already had several. Isn't it kind of late? She asked. Maybe you should wait until tomorrow. AutoZone is open until 9, I said, as I grabbed my keys and headed to the driveway. I got into my daily driver, a 2009 Mustang GT. That car was paid off and I loved it. I had started the 67 as a hobby project. I decided to visit my neighbors, Chris and Emily Green, who lived behind us and often used our garage. When Emily answered the door, she seemed a little too casual, letting her robe open slightly more. I asked her to bring Chris down, sensing this was a conversation for both of them. After we exchanged greetings, I got straight to the point. I explained that I had overheard a conversation between Carol and her friend, which led me to believe Carol might have been involved in their swapping group. Emily looked at Chris and admitted she had expected this to come out eventually. She explained they weren't to blame, as they had rules in place to prevent such issues. According to her, Carol had approached them, saying our marriage needed a spark, and they had been misled into thinking we were both on board with the idea. Emily even mentioned that she had been excited at the thought of me joining them. Emily explained that Carol had approached them, saying she wanted to join their group with a different partner, and that I was fully on board. She claimed our marriage had intimacy issues, and that her participation would be temporary while I was undergoing treatment. They had seen similar situations before and believed it could help, with their rules prohibiting any emotional attack. ATTMS, they gave Carol a form for me to sign and asked her to have me call them, but she said I was too embarrassed. Emily believed her because of our long friendship. Carol first showed up with Steve Clark, whose wife, Misty, had always avoided them. Misty seemed uncomfortable with their lifestyle, and Emily assumed she was repressed. The partnership between Carol and Steve seemed reasonable since both allegedly had their spouse's permission. Almost a year later, however, Emily received a call from a lawyer threatening to expose their group. Misty had not given Steve permission and was divorcing him for infidelity. Carol was also named in the case for contributing to the dissolution of their marriage. The club banned both Carol and Steve, but the matter was settled quietly. Misty won the house, car, alimony, half of their savings, and part of Steve's pension, with alimony continuing until she remarries or Steve retires. Steve also had to pay the mortgage. Emily noted that they kept everything quiet to avoid hurting innocent family members, which is why she and Chris remained friendly with me but distanced themselves from Carol. Emily informed me that recently Carol and Ella had been hosting parties with various single men. While it was mostly Ella, Carol had participated occasionally. I thanked her for telling me, though I was seething inside, angrier than ever. I knew what I had to do next. I called Joe Clark, a colleague and Steve's brother, under the guise of asking about Benny's school issues. During the conversation, Joe mentioned that Steve was living in an apartment because, in his divorce, Misty had gotten the house and all. Joe speculated that Misty may have set Steve up, possibly being a lesbian, which added to Steve's devastation. Armed with Steve's new address, I headed to a modest apartment complex where most residents were either students or newcomers. Despite my anger, I rushed up the stairs to Steve's third-floor apartment, still fueled by the intensity of my emotions. I knocked on Steve's door, which he cracked open, the security chains still latched. He recognized me, but his guarded response only fueled my anger. After some tense back and forth, I made it clear that if he didn't open the door, I'd involve the police, and the consequences for his career as a high school principal would be severe once the truth came out about his affair with my wife. Reluctantly, he opened the door, pleading for me to keep quiet to protect his job. Inside his small apartment, he tried to apologize, shifting the blame onto Carol. He claimed my marriage wasn't ruined and that, in time, I'd forget about it. His own suffering, he said, was proof he was paying for his actions, but his words only made me angrier. I snapped my first punch, sending his head back, and before he could react, I landed a second, knocking him out of his chair. I kicked him repeatedly, his face, stomach, back, legs, and groin, until he was unconscious and no longer resisting. I made a cup of coffee and waited for Steve to regain consciousness, checking that he was still breathing. One of my kicks had knocked him out cold. When he finally came to, I leaned over him, making it clear he was to tell no one about what had happened. He nodded weakly in agreement. I explained that Carol would call him soon, but he was not to mention that I knew about their affair. Carol had no idea that I was aware of everything. I had overheard one of her phone calls to Ella about being kicked out of the local swapping club. After talking to Emily and Chris, I got the full story. I warned Steve that if he valued his career, he'd stay quiet about all of it. He agreed before I left. I asked Steve about Misty, despite her being younger, prettier, and thinner than Carol. Steve described Misty as boring, emotionally needy, and uninterested in experimenting. He regretted marrying her, resentment growing due to the contrast between her and Carol, who was more adventurous. I went home and headed straight to the garage, where Carol soon joined me, wearing only a robe. My mind raced with thoughts, suspecting Carol was paying some kind of settlement to Misty as well. Around 8 months ago, just before Benny graduated and left for college, Carol had taken a part-time job because both kids were out of the house. I used to joke about how little money she made, but now I realized that most of her earnings were likely going to Misty as part of the lawsuit settlement. That night, when Carol asked me to come to bed, I normally would have jumped at the chance. But I stayed distant, telling her I'd be in soon while my mind churned over how blind I'd been to her actions. The next morning, I left the house as if heading to work, but instead went to buy some electronics. I visited Chris and Emily again to get the name of Misty's divorce lawyer and set up a meeting at lunchtime. I returned home, telling Carol I missed her, after sharing kisses that made me feel sick. I had her make me lunch while I discreetly installed a recording device on the phone and placed small cameras around the house. Later, I met with the lawyer who confirmed she could handle my case and offered a discount, since much of the legal groundwork was already in place. She also assured me that Misty's divorce records, including Carol's involvement, were part of the public record, meaning I could prove infidelity without much effort. The lawyer warned me not to do anything reckless. She had noticed my busted knuckles and the look of devastation on my face, suspecting I might want to lash out. She explained that acting out violently wouldn't solve anything and could land me in jail, especially since what was taken from me was given freely. She compared my situation to Misty's, noting how her husband's betrayal had shattered her, turning a once sweet and shy woman into someone who withdrew from everyone. Over the next few days, I monitored the phone recordings. On December 29th, I finally heard something useful. Ella was pressuring Carol to attend a party, saying, "Carol, you have to find a way to come. This is going to be special. I got Fred, Barney, Larry, Curly, Mo, and Joe coming." I even got SHM to agree to drop by, but he can't stay for very long. He's going to be at Emily's party with his wife. Can you believe he's sneaking out of a swapper's bash to come to our little party? Fred is supposedly going to bring a few of the guys he works with. It would be so much better if you were there. Ella, unlike you, I have a husband at home. I have no idea what we're doing for New Year's Eve, said Carol. He asked me yesterday if I wanted to go to Chris and Emily's party. That would be a disaster. Half of the people in their little club still hate me. One of them would probably start flapping their lips, and I could lose Gary. The later the evening went on, the bigger the chances that one of them would get drunk and start talking crap. We probably won't do anything. We'll probably sit home like two old people and watch TV. This conversation sparked an idea. The next day, pretending to go to work again, I began putting my plan into action. Knowing exactly who Ella had mentioned and what I needed to do, I followed Fred, a construction worker and divorced little league coach, as he left his apartment. Catching him by surprise as he was about to get into his truck, I hit him hard, expecting a fight but receiving none. He panicked, thinking it was a robbery, offering me his money when he realized it was me. He started complaining about his possibly broken jaw, confused about why I attacked him. I demanded to know how many times, and he assumed I meant baseball, defending his decision not to let my son play. I silenced him with a slap and clarified that I was asking about Carol. He instantly turned pale, realizing the true reason behind the confrontation. Gary, I'm really sorry, man, he whined. After my divorce, I felt so lonely and desperate, that's why I went to see Ella. I only did it discreetly. Ella's the biggest hoe in town. Nobody wants anyone to know they sleep with her, but half the guys around here have. Carol has been with her once or twice, but she's not like Ella. She just wanted some variety. She doesn't let a guy kiss her, won't give BJ, and doesn't let anyone have a hole either. I didn't want to hurt you, Gary, but it was just an act. Come on. Name one guy who wouldn't hook up with another dude's wife if he thought no one would find out. Me, I replied. Fred, you have two options. First, I could name you in my divorce, drag your name through the mud, and you'd lose your job coaching the Little League team, along with any respect you have in this town. Isn't your boss the mayor's brother? That won't look good, will it? His eyes widened in fear at my suggestion. Or you can do exactly what I say. Keep telling Ella and Carol you'll be at their little party, and that you'll go along with whatever they want. You give me all the details about when and where it will be, and then on the day of the event you steer clear of any trouble. After that, I'll forget everything I know about you and we'll start fresh. But if you warn Ella, Carol, or anyone else attending this little Zex Fest, all bets are off. I'll take option 2, he said. I'll call you as soon as I hear from them with more details. Gary, can I go to work? I'm already going to be late. I walked away from Fred, leaving him in shock. Later that afternoon, I confronted Barney as he was leaving work. My first punch didn't take him down, and he managed to hit me back, which only fueled my anger. Grabbing his arm, I slammed him to the ground and kicked him hard in the ribs. Hearing a snap, struggling to breathe, Barney tried to reason with me, acknowledging that this had to be about Carol. Barney admitted there was no justification for what he did, claiming it was just an act and that Carol meant nothing to him. He explained that after his heart attack, he had acted on impulse, feeling vulnerable. For him, it was a thoughtless fling, no different from being with Ella. He assured me he'd leave town and swore he'd never touch another married woman, but his words felt hollow. But why leave town? I asked. You were born here. Because every time I see you or Carol from now on, it'll feel awkward or uncomfortable. Me living here would put a serious strain on your marriage, he explained. I was taken aback. Barney was the only person so far who had shown any concern for the marriage he had helped ruin. Barney, I need you to do something, I said. But it doesn't involve leaving town. You don't need to worry about Carol and me. We're done. What do you mean you're done? He asked, confused. I'm planning to divorce her, I stated. He looked stunned but pressed on. But why? He seemed almost as upset as I was. Gary, she loves you. It was just an act. For crying out loud. She doesn't even let anyone kiss her. You have kids together. You can't be serious. Is this about your ego? You don't want her anymore just because some other guy slept with her? This will destroy her. I don't want to feel even partially responsible for breaking up a family, Barney. It's not about ego, it's about trust and love, I replied. I'll never be able to trust her again. I do love her. This has shattered my heart, and I don't know how I'll move on. But I just can't see myself with her anymore. Maybe there's a bit of ego involved. Part of being human is having a little self-confidence and belief in ourselves. And that pride won't let me live with someone who could hurt me like this. He just nodded and sat there with his head in his hands. Crap, Barney. If you want her that badly, you can have her. I'm out of the picture. He suddenly looked up at me as if I was crazy. Why the hell would I want a woman who cheats? He asked. We both suddenly burst out laughing. After giving Barney instructions on what I expected, we parted ways. My final visit would be the hardest, and it took me to a house just a few blocks from mine. I had passed it often, but it had changed. The warmth and love of a home were gone, leaving just a house, a hollow box holding memories. I knocked, still uncertain if I should stay, and after a pause, the door opened. We stood in awkward silence before she let me in. What followed was a raw conversation, the kind only two people betrayed by those they loved can truly understand. We talked about the emptiness that never fades, the loss of trust, and the need to do something, anything, to reclaim our sense of self. As I expressed the pain of feeling irreparably broken, something shifted in her. A smile slowly emerged, lighting up her face and reminding me just how beautiful she was beneath the weight of her sorrow. Misty, I said, you got your revenge on Steve. You kicked him out of his house, and he's still suffering the consequences. You took most of his money, and now he's stuck in a sad little apartment downtown. But how would you like to get back at Carol? I would love that, she replied. But the terms of my divorce and my civil suit against her prevent me from discussing her role in ending my marriage. No offense, but I really hate that witch. I explained my plan and her potential involvement, and she laughed again. That sounds awesome, she said. But how do you know she's actually going to show up? She's really cautious when it comes to your marriage. On the way home, I brainstormed how to get Carol to attend Ella's party. She had been adamant that we would likely spend New Year's Eve together, but I realized I could fake being sick to give her an excuse to go without me and avoid intimacy with her. As soon as I got home, I went straight to bed, pretending to be asleep when Carol found me. Using a hand warmer to feign a fever, I convinced her I had caught the flu. The next day, I made a show of calling in sick, all while secretly recording her phone calls through an app on my phone. I captured a call between Carol and Barney where he described his plans in bed for her, which would be useful in the divorce. Carol set limits on what she would allow but agreed to let him sleep with her by lunchtime. I knew it was game on. Carol handed me flu pills, the same ones that had knocked her out for hours, likely planning to give them to me the following night. I pretended to take the pills while Carol watched, monitoring how long it took for me to fall asleep. Once I appeared to be out, she called Ella, confirming she'd attend the party, though she insisted it would be her last time. Ella, however, doubted Carol would ever quit. Carol on New Year's Eve, as Gary lay sick in bed, I was consumed with guilt over what I was about to do. Just days before, he had cared for me while I was sick, even taking time off work to look after me. His kindness had almost exposed my secrets when he ran into Maisie. If she had said anything, I could have lost him. I had already decided that this would be the last time I cheated on him. Watching him now, I questioned why I ever started. I convinced myself that variety had spiced up our marriage, but after each affair, I became desperate for intimacy with Gary, likely driven by guilt. It felt like the more I gave him, the less guilty I should feel. In my mind, the more I was with Gary, the less my cheating mattered. But no matter how many times I made love to him, I could never erase my infidelity. Even if the ratio was overwhelmingly in Gary's favor, I could never be 100% faithful again. The saying, once a cheater, always a cheater, weighed on me. Looking at Gary, I felt the urge to cry. He had never cheated on me, and from the moment we met, he treated me like a princess, loving me unconditionally. Even as I gained weight over the years, his devotion never wavered, and I knew I didn't deserve it. About 2 years ago, Gary and I were having breakfast after watching part of the Victoria's Secret fashion show the previous night. Halfway through, Gary became unusually aggressive, rubbing himself against my leg. I wasn't in the mood. Feeling bloated and self-conscious, watching those unnaturally thin models on stage, their exaggerated figures and ridiculous wings made me feel like an elephant in comparison. Despite my discomfort, Gary was relentless, clearly turned on by what he saw. He forced my legs apart, and once he did, my resistance melted away. In the end, I enjoyed it, even though the whole situation had started out awkwardly. But that next morning I needed to know. "So, Gary, was last night really that good for you?" I asked. "Which one of those hoes were you imagining?" I was on the verge of tears. He looked at me and started laughing. "You're joking, right?" he asked. "What's so funny?" I whined. "I know I'm getting older and heavier. You can't bounce a quarter off my ass anymore, and my top is starting to sag. My legs are thicker." "Carol, shut up before I start laughing too hard," he said. "While we were watching TV last night, the only thing I could think about was how lucky I am. Your shapes are huge compared to those women. Most guys are always going to prefer a bigger chest whenever they can. Yours are even bigger than when we got married. It's like an investment. The more they grow, the happier you are each year, and you know I love your ass. I can barely keep my hands off it. It's big and soft, and I just love squeezing it. Honey, I hate to break it to you, but you've never been able to bounce a quarter off your..." Nobody can do that. They proved it on one of those man shows on Spike TV. "So, what got you all excited last night?" I asked, wiping my tears. "It was seeing those skinny girls on TV that made me realize I had a full-bodied, real woman next to me," he said, "and she was mine and I could do anything I wanted with her. It drove me wild." "I'm sorry." I snatched the bacon from his hand. "You should be," I snapped. "What you did was just wrong." "I thought you got into it once we started," he said, looking sad. "I did," I replied sharply. "Then why should I be sorry?" he asked. "Because you stopped," I exclaimed, grabbing his arm and pulling him back to our bedroom. As I reflected on my past actions, I couldn't help but question why I was cheating. My life with Gary was practically perfect, and I was a fool for risking it. Despite knowing this, I realized I would still go through with it. And even if I stopped for a while, I'd likely cheat again. It wasn't the act itself that drove me. Gary gave me more satisfaction than anyone ever had. I loved him deeply, more than I could express. He had fathered our children, and I cherished him. The thrill of cheating came from doing something forbidden, something wrong. It wasn't about the physical act. It was about the danger, the excitement of crossing a line I shouldn't. It felt like a gambler risking everything on one spin of the wheel. I knew I was being reckless, yet I couldn't resist. I spent the day holding Gary's hand while he slept, feeling overwhelmed by how much I loved him. He gave me his love so freely, and I knew I could give up anything for him. As the evening approached, I made him his favorite soup and woke him up, hoping we could talk like we had when he cared for me while I was sick. For the first time, guilt gnawed at me in a way it never had before. I had cheated for years, but this felt different. I realized that in the past, my infidelities were spontaneous, impulsive decisions, whether with Steve or others. It was never planned. It just happened, which somehow made it easier to justify. But this time, with everything premeditated, the weight of what I was about to do felt heavier than ever. I knew I was heading off to sleep with multiple men while my husband lay sick in our bed. Worries crept in. What if there was a fire? What if he had a bad reaction to the pills? Despite the guilt and the risks, I couldn't stop myself. I was already too far gone. Gary was struggling to eat his soup, looking weak and barely able to stay awake. He apologized for ruining my New Year's Eve, and in that moment, I almost broke down. I sat beside him and turned on the TV, ready to abandon my plans. But then the phone rang, and it was Ella urging me to come join the others at the motel. They were all waiting. Gary was soon snoring, and just to be sure, I gave him more pills and water, ensuring he would sleep until morning. I convinced myself I could go for an hour and be back before 9. I didn't bother changing or freshening up, feeling that no one but Gary deserved any special effort from me. When I arrived at the motel, I felt exposed, standing outside the door, hoping no one saw me parking my car out front in such a bad neighborhood. It was risky, but there was no other option. The thought crossed my mind, who would believe a hoe could be raped? If I were ever questioned, the number of DNA samples they'd find on me would be enough to dismiss any claim. When I arrived, only Ella was there, dressed in a silk robe and lingerie. The room didn't feel like a party, just an ice chest, beer, and a bowl of Doritos on the table. Ella explained that it wasn't about food. This was a ZX party, and she urged me to change into something revealing. I refused, stating that if the men wanted me, they'd have to take me as I was. Ella remained cheerful, confident that by midnight we'd be too sore to walk. I reminded her that I planned to be home with Gary by 9. She just smiled. You'll loosen up big time once you get a Johnson or two in you. Half an hour later, we were still sitting there, waiting for Fred, Barney, and Steve, who were supposed to arrive early. Finally, at 8 o'clock, Mo and SHM showed up. Ella noticed me checking the time and warned me not to leave her alone with a group of men. She quickly grabbed Mo and began performing on him. SHM sat on the couch, patting the cushion next to him. I walked over, lifted my skirt, exposing my hair, feeling a mixture of excitement. Hey, he said, check out what Ella's doing to Mo. I think I'd like to give that a shot. He waggled his limp tool at me. Listen, SHM, I replied calmly. I'm here to have ZX. If you want to go over there and do Mo Johnson, I'll wait for you, but I'm leaving in less than an hour. Depending on how long you take, you might be the only guy to get this tonight. He got on top of me. The excitement of being with someone new always had a significant effect. I was already wet before he was fully aroused. That's it, I moaned. Give it to me, Gary. Do it hard. SHM suddenly stopped. Just then, Larry and Curly entered, quickly stripping off their clothes. Larry joined me on the bed and entered me without hesitation. SHM was silent, but the moment made us both question our reasons for being there. I then realized that accidentally calling him Gary might have made him think of his own wife. Ella was clearly the patron saint of hoes. She wasn't motivated by money or the excitement of infidelity. Her marriage had ended long ago, leaving no one for her to betray. Ella was relentlessly promiscuous, seeking physical pleasure without reservation. She was indiscriminate, engaging with men of all races, ages, and backgrounds, including the disabled and the homeless. As the party picked up, she thrived in the spotlight. Watching her, I felt a twinge of envy. I shifted for a better view as Larry was with me. Ella was swaying her hips with intense enthusiasm. ISM. She radiated an almost divine allure. Damn, I found myself wanting her. The door swung open, and chaos erupted. 2 women charged into the room, screaming at the top of their lungs. One was really overweight, and the other looked like she was heavily made up, like someone from a trailer park. At first, I thought they might be other women Ella had invited, or even some angry workers who didn't like us being there, but it quickly became clear who they were. Then 2 more women came in, and the yelling just got louder. The first 2 yanked Ella off the couch and started kicking and hitting her. Ella tried to fight back, but with 2, then 3 of them, she ended up on the floor, trying to shield herself from the blows. I lost track of Ella when the last woman grabbed Larry away from me and yanked me by my hair. She was my size but furious. She pulled my hair and slammed my head into the wall. I was dazed, seeing stars. Then she landed a huge punch to my face, and my legs went weak. All I wanted to do was fall to the floor and sleep, but she kept me on my feet and kept hitting me. I'm not sure if I blacked out for a moment, but suddenly there were 4 or 5 cops in the room. They separated us and took everyone to the police station. With how everything unfolded, it felt like someone had set us up. After getting treated for my injuries, I was taken to the local hospital for x-rays and follow-up care. I ended up with a sprained neck, a small fracture around my eye, a broken nose, a split lip, and 2 black eyes. They were also keeping an eye on me for signs of a concussion. After being taken to the police station, I made a statement about the events of that evening and was placed in a cell, unsurprisingly, sharing it with Ella. Her face was bruised, but she seemed unfazed, talking casually about the situation. Ella asked if I had told the truth, and I mentioned we were just having a small New Year's party when some women barged in and started attacking us. She gave advice on how to avoid serious charges, insisting that as long as no money exchanged hands, we couldn't be charged with sex work, and the fight wasn't our fault, so assault charges were unlikely. She even offered a plan to explain my bruises to Gary, suggesting I tell him we had a fight after I refused to go to a party with her. She figured he would believe we hated each other and wouldn't suspect anything. However, things didn't go as Ella predicted. The district attorney was clever, charging us with using a private structure for lewd and lascivious behavior in an area not zoned for such activities, a law typically used to target street Z work. The charge carried a hefty fine or the possibility of 3 years in jail. We faced the judge on Monday morning, and our bail was set at $10,000 each. Ella tried calling Steve to help with the money, but he didn't answer, leaving her in tears. I began to suspect Steve had set us up. There had been a camera in the room, which I hadn't noticed until the women barged in. Those women, married to Mo and his friends, were likely trying to catch them cheating. Steve was the only one who had been in the room before I arrived, likely planting the camera when he dropped off the food. He never came back, and Fred and Barney didn't show either, probably tipped off by Steve. I figured Steve had done it for money, as most of his finances went to his ex-wife after their divorce. He might have been paid by those women to set us up. Later, a court-appointed lawyer, Herman Weaver, came in to offer us a deal. If we didn't press assault charges against the wives, they wouldn't sue us or mention us in their divorce cases. However, the charges against us were coming from the district attorney, who, during an election year, wanted to appear tough on crime. Ella, always looking for a way out, seemed ready to try her own form of negotiation. The lawyer, visibly disgusted by Ella's suggestion, described the women who attacked us as upstanding members of the community, acting out of emotion to save their marriages. He implied that, regardless of our decisions, they likely wouldn't face jail time and would probably receive community service. I felt guilty when he reminded me that while I claimed to be a married woman needing to care for my sick husband, I had been in a hotel room with multiple men. His words hit hard, and I knew I needed to get home before Gary woke up. This whole ordeal was the wake-up call I needed. I was done with cheating. When the lawyer returned, he brought 2 of the women, including the one who had attacked me. She looked defeated, her face streaked with tears and makeup, avoiding eye contact. Her hands were bruised, her nails chipped, clearly indicating she wasn't someone used to fighting. Though I expected an apology, she instead confronted me, accusing me of destroying her family. Her words stung, and in that moment, I realized the full weight of the damage I had caused. She broke down again, clearly devastated. She spoke about how much she loved her husband, how she had taken care of him for over a decade, raising their children and doing everything for him, only to find out he had been sneaking around with me. Her anger flared as she lashed out, calling me a hoe and even trying to attack me again, forcing the lawyer to intervene. I felt genuine regret for what I had done to her, apologizing. I realized how much I had hurt her, but her response showed she was exhausted, emotionally drained. She admitted she had given everything to her husband but felt it wasn't enough. She told me I could have him if I dropped the charges, as she was done with him. I assured her I didn't want Larry and explained that I had my own husband and children. This was just an attempt to spice up my marriage, nothing more. I promised to drop the charges if she answered a couple of questions, after making me sign a paper, which I reluctantly did. I asked how much they had paid Steve to set us up. She looked genuinely confused and said she didn't know anyone named Steve. According to her, she and the other women had all received a phone call from someone telling them where to catch their husbands cheating. She had simply followed the directions, not knowing any more than that. I was stunned. It had to be one of the other wives who set us up. The lawyer informed me that I was free to go because someone had paid my bail. As I left, Ella begged me to help her, but I ignored her pleas, knowing I had my own problems to deal with. At the front desk, I asked the policewoman who bailed me out, thinking it might have been Steve. After all, we had a history, and maybe he didn't want to leave me in there. When I tried to use my credit card to bail Ella out, both cards were declined, and the policewoman reminded me they didn't take checks. Stepping outside, I saw a small woman in a beautiful dress waiting for me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. After briefly stepping away, she returned, driving my car. As she approached, I took in her striking appearance. A slim but shapely figure in a shimmering blue dress, with long, toned legs that glowed beneath her high heels. No matter what Gary always said, I would have loved to have a body like that. Then it hit me. "Misty," I exclaimed. "Why did you come to get me?" "Just helping a friend," she replied. "But I thought you couldn't understand me," I said, confused. "I can't," she said coldly. "You're not the friend. I'm really enjoying this." She handed me a pile of papers. "I'm not a court officer," she explained, "so these aren't official documents. They're just copies, but the restraining order in there is legitimate and will be enforced. You need to stay 500 feet away from Gary's house, his workplace, and him. He doesn't want anything to do with you. Any contact must go through your lawyers. All your clothes and personal items are in the car or the trunk. There's plenty of gas to get you to your parents' place in Ohio. The official papers will be sent there by messenger in 2 days. I'm supposed to tell you he loved you more than anything. He's leaving it to you to explain the divorce to the kids. But if you lie to them, he'll tell them the truth, and he has proof. He's also setting up a line of credit for you that will be deducted from the final settlement amounts. I should tell you to drive safely, but honestly, I don't care if you do. He even bought you a meal in case you get hungry, but I ate your fries. Sue me. And just so you know, if you miss another payment on your settlement with me, I'll drag you back to court, and you could end up back in jail." I was in shock. It was so ridiculous. I should have seen it coming. I always knew what would happen if I got caught, but the pain I felt was off the charts. And everything she mentioned, my parents finding out, my kids finding out, I hadn't even thought about any of that. Then she said he had proof, and it hit me, the video camera. It wasn't Steve who set us up. It was Gary. "So you got your revenge, huh? Little witch." I shot back at her. "I slept with your stupid husband, so you decided to sleep with mine. I never aimed to wreck your marriage. That was all you. You messed up your own relationship. Steve just needed some excitement. He told me you were terrible in bed. If it wasn't me, it would have been someone else. You were lucky it was me. I didn't want Steve. I didn't love him. You destroyed my marriage for nothing." I crumpled onto the steps of the police station, her voice cutting through me, icy and clear. "I've never slept with Gary Carroll. I've only loved once, and you ruined that. Gary and I aren't in any kind of relationship. The information about my divorce and your role in it didn't come from me. From what I know, Gary told you about running into me at the market like any good husband. He came home and told you. You got upset about our chance meeting and spilled it to your coworker, Gary. Overhearing you, he went and pounded the hell out of Steve, who probably spilled everything. He's been running around town, beating up your lovers while orchestrating all of this. Gary knows my pain. He understands what it's like to lose someone you love because of their own selfishness. So, knowing that, he offered me a chance at this little bit of revenge, and I took it." She turned and walked away, and then a car I recognized pulled up to take her. My heart shattered as I watched my husband's Mustang drive off with the woman who had just destroyed me, disappearing into the night. Misty asked why I wanted her to wear the stunning blue dress to deliver the divorce papers to Carol, and I explained that she looked beautiful in it and hoped it would help ease her pain, even if only a little. I reassured her that beauty isn't just about physical features but the confidence she radiated. The dress was perfect for the party we were heading to. When we arrived at Chris and Emily's house, Misty hesitated, unsure about going in. But I encouraged her. Emily greeted us warmly, and Misty gradually relaxed, especially after Emily took her aside for a private chat in the kitchen. Meanwhile, I sat in the living room, chatting and waiting for my turn on the Xbox, unaware that no one knew about my divorce from Carol yet. As the night went on, couples discreetly disappeared upstairs, often not with the people they arrived with, but no one paid it much attention. The evening took an unexpected turn when a woman, Helen, approached me, subtly asking if I was available now that I wasn't with Carol. I revealed that Carol and I were divorcing. Before I could say more, Misty reappeared and possessively took my arm, making it clear I wasn't available. Her firm response to Helen was the most anyone had heard her say since her own divorce from Steve. Across the room, I noticed Emily giving Misty a thumbs up. From that point on, Misty and I were inseparable for the rest of the party. People kept asking questions, curious about us, and we repeatedly explained that we were just friends, helping each other heal from bad relationships. Men frequently asked Misty to dance, but she politely declined. And though I did the same, I danced with her. Our dances were reserved, with a lot of space between us. At midnight, as the countdown began for the New Year's ball drop, everyone kissed the person next to them, regardless of whether they had arrived together. Helen stood next to me, and until Misty stepped in and blocked her, the situation felt awkward. I wasn't sure if we should kiss, but Misty hadn't been kissed in over a year. When she pulled me in for a gentle kiss, everything seemed to stop, and I felt dizzy afterward, unable to believe I was kissing another woman so soon after my soon-to-be ex-wife had been sent away. News of my divorce, along with those of Larry M. O'Curley and SHM, spread quickly through town. Both Carol and Ella received 6 months in jail and a year of probation, as the DA aimed to make an example of them. However, his efforts didn't help his re-election campaign, and he lost. Because of her conviction, my evidence, and her involvement in Misty's divorce, the judge awarded me the house, half of our assets, and minimal alimony for 2 years. I set aside all the money in an account for Carol and gave it to her through her parents once she was released from jail. Misty and I remained close, supposedly helping each other through the pain of our divorces. We spent a lot of time together, especially on weekends. She helped me clean my large house, and we'd head to her place for yard work afterward. Often, we went out for dinner or took walks, and during winter, we'd stay in and watch movies. Misty was the sweetest woman I'd ever known, and even my kids accepted her. Though we were just friends, guys frequently asked me about her, which annoyed me when they interrupted our time together. Eventually, I told Misty she was over her divorce and should consider dating one of the many men who were interested in her. Her response irritated me, but I knew it was time for both of us to move on. It had been a year since my divorce and nearly 3 since hers. Despite my frustration, I realized Misty was grateful for the support I had given her, helping her reintegrate into life in the community. She acknowledged that she hadn't had closeness in years, and though I was hesitant, I knew she was ready to move forward. Misty made it clear she wasn't like Carol. She wasn't interested in jumping into bed with someone without a deeper connection. She wanted love and romance, not one-night stands or casual encounters. I realized my jealousy had gotten the better of me and apologized, acknowledging she deserved to be happy. Misty then revealed she had been dating someone and asked if I wanted to meet him. I hesitated, knowing the guy wouldn't want me around, but she was insistent, showing me photos on her iPad, most of which were of her alone at places we had been together. She even pointed out a photo I had taken of her in tiny shorts, one that I had deleted out of guilt. Misty seemed unfazed, mentioning how much her new guy appreciated the same things I did. As we talked, it became clear that there were unresolved feelings between us. Misty suspected as much, and as I struggled with the idea of her being with someone else, I realized she was right. Our friendship had reached a breaking point. She mentioned that even Steve approved of her new relationship, but that didn't make it any easier for me to accept. I admitted that maybe I wasn't a good friend after all, unable to support her in this new chapter of her life. Misty, in turn, didn't fully grasp how difficult it was for me, having already been betrayed by someone I loved. I expected something different from her, but the situation made it clear that things between us would never be the same. Suddenly, Misty was in tears, and I was close to breaking down too. The intensity of the moment hit hard, and I moved toward the door, but Misty stopped me, thrusting her iPad in my face. She showed me a picture, and I was confused, thinking it was of her and the man she'd been talking about. But then I realized it was a picture of the two of us. It dawned on me that I was the guy she had been dating all along. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. She confessed her feelings, and I admitted that I cared deeply for her too. In that moment, everything changed. Her iPad dropped, and she fell into my arms, kissing me passionately. Misty revealed she'd been waiting for this since our New Year's Eve kiss at Emily's, over a year ago. She explained how she had to push me with Emily's advice because I was moving so slowly. Even my daughter had suggested how to get me out of the friend zone. It was clear this whole time we had been dancing around our feelings, and finally, everything fell into place. Carol, that witch Emily, was such a pro at throwing parties that she was now in charge of all the holiday events for the entire town. It was ridiculous that a woman who hosted swapping parties at her own place was so well regarded in a town where Ella and I were judged harshly for the past year and a half. I have worked my arse off trying to save my marriage. I even started while I was still in jail, writing a couple of letters to Gary and having my kids deliver them once I got out. I went to see him, wanting to talk and try to explain my side. I at least wanted to say I was sorry. I walked up to my house on a Saturday morning, just hours after being released. I knocked on my own door and was completely shocked when that little hoe answered. She said she was helping with the housework because Gary wasn't great at cleaning, and the place needed a woman's touch. But I saw through her excuses. She wanted him, and from the look on her face, she seemed to think she already had him. Before I could respond, she smugly closed the door in my face. I had planned to waltz in, have a heated exchange, apologize, and somehow reignite our marriage. I expected the talking to lead to something more intimate, putting us back on track. Instead, I walked away frustrated, confused, and determined to win him back. Over the past year and a half, I had tried countless schemes to get Gary back, none of which worked. My closest chance came when I was hospitalized with food poisoning. Gary visited me for 3 days straight and we talked. He even offered to let me stay at the house for a while after my release, but nothing had gone as I had hoped. Seeing Gary spend those days with me in the hospital made me think there was still hope for us, but it never panned out. Misty appeared, bringing me a card, flowers, and magazines while Gary stepped out. She confronted me, making it clear that my attempts to rekindle our relationship wouldn't work. She knew everything, even my shellfish allergy, and told me Gary had moved on. He wasn't the type to cheat, and my attempts to win him back would only make him appreciate her more. Her words stung, but the real blow came when Gary returned. Misty kissed him, and it wasn't just a casual peck. He melted into it. Their bodies fit together naturally. Watching them, I realized it was over. Gary had truly moved on, and their love was different from ours. For them, love wasn't just about being together. It was an all-consuming devotion. They couldn't even imagine being with anyone else, physically or emotionally. Watching them, I finally understood that closeness and love were inseparable for them, something deeper than I had ever grasped. Steve and I had no chance of getting back with them. Neither Misty nor Gary would ever forgive a betrayal like ours, even if something happened to her. I knew I still wouldn't have a shot with Gary after leaving the hospital. I tried to move on with my life, but in such a small town, I constantly ran into them. Their sweetness toward each other was nauseating. Misty had moved into my old house with Gary and even gave Steve his house back. She didn't sell it or take the money. She just gave it to him and reduced his alimony, claiming he had paid enough. Meanwhile, Ella and I became outcasts. While it bothered me, Ella didn't care. She always found a way to land on her feet. Literally. That's where she thrived. In jail. It became clear just how comfortable Ella was in her skin. Within days, no one bothered us and we lived well. While others struggled, prison for me became a place to reflect on my mistakes. Ella, however, used her attraction to manipulate the system. She slept with male guards, therapists, career counselors, female guards, and even some prisoners. It confirmed what I had suspected all along. Ella was willing to do anything for a quarter and would even lend you the quarter to get started. When we were released, things took a darker turn. She hung a poster of a donkey in our apartment, staring at it with the same distant gaze Gary once had for Mustangs. Ella had grown restless, thinking we needed to move since there weren't enough men left in town willing to sleep with her now. I find myself at another dull party, watching the nightmare of my life unfold before me, knowing there's no escape from the mess I've created. Just before midnight, with the new year full of possibilities for everyone but me, Gary does the unthinkable. He gets down on one knee, and the room holds its breath. Time seems to stop as everyone watches him propose. For a brief moment, Misty's eyes meet mine across the floor, and I give her a small nod. Then, in her tiny voice, she accepts. They kiss, and the entire room exhales as the clock strikes midnight and joy fills the space. I can't stay here any longer, I mutter to myself about leaving. But when I look around, I spot Ella's feet sticking out from under a nearby table. The man at that table fidgets nervously. Steve suddenly appears and asks me to dance, but I tell him bluntly that I'd rather skip the pretense. He agrees, no strings, no romance, no emotions, no relationships. Ella pops up at the mention of intimacy, suggesting a three-way. She points out Gary and Misty, still lost in their kiss, unaware of the world around them. Misty is only 35, and I wonder how she'll handle motherhood. Steve agrees half-heartedly, his eyes glued to them, and I echo his sentiment, though my heart aches. All I can think about is how much I wish I were in her place.